The black man entered the Valmont Hotel at 9:03 a.m. Winter light swept through the revolving doors, leaving a faint golden halo on the deep Persian carpet. His earth-brown overcoat lifted slightly in the breeze, revealing a charcoal turtleneck beneath and a pair of polished oxblood leather shoes. No logo, no corporate badge, just him and a presence carved in stillness. He placed one hand on the front desk. His voice was low, steady, unhurried. "I have a reservation. Name's Julian Blake, Presidential Suite." The receptionist looked up, her eyes scanning his face, then his coat. No smile. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Yes. But I don't see your name on the list." She glanced at her screen, then lowered her voice just enough to signal he wasn't exactly welcome. "That suite is usually reserved for business clients or long-term partners of the chain." Julian said nothing. He pulled out his phone, opened the confirmation email, and held it up. She glanced at it just for a second, then pressed the manager call button. No verification, no apology. Behind them, a white security guard stood up from the lounge sofa. Just one nod was enough. "Have you ever been denied the right to exist simply because of how someone sees you?" In this hotel, the chandeliers might be worth hundreds of thousands, but a judgmental glance costs exactly 1 second. And in that 1 second, who did they decide he was? Hit like if you've ever been misjudged for your skin or your style. Hit subscribe if you believe justice doesn't need to shout, just show up at the right time. Because today's story will leave you silent, then standing. When the hotel manager emerged, he looked Julian up and down as if assessing financial risk, not welcoming a guest. "You may be in the wrong place, sir. This is the Valmont." "I know," Julian replied. "I booked this room 3 months ago." "The Presidential Suite. You're confirming that?" "Exactly. And I have written confirmation." He held out the email again. The manager didn't bother to take it. And in that moment, in just that look, the story began. Valmont was the kind of hotel that made people adjust their posture the moment they walked through the door. The marble tiles in the lobby were so pristinely white, it felt as though dirt itself was outlawed. High ceilings, chandeliers dripping gold light onto Greco-Roman columns. The air held a scent of musk, orchids, and something expensive, though it was unclear whether it was perfume or pride. Julian R. Blake pushed through the revolving doors, his posture as straight as the seams of his coat. His earth-toned trench coat was buttoned neatly. Beneath it, a quiet gray turtleneck, pleated wool trousers, and polished chestnut leather shoes. No jewelry, no luggage, no entourage, just him and an unshakable composure. His hand, still cold from the January air, rested on the black stone counter of the front desk. The woman behind it wore a name tag Ashlyn pinned to a fitted ivory suit, her blonde hair tied in a half-knot, lips painted nude. She was leaning over her screen, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. A group of white guests a few steps away were inquiring about the rooftop brunch menu. When Julian stepped forward, Ashlyn looked up. Her eyes landed on his face for less than a second, then immediately drifted past his shoulder, toward the door behind him as if expecting someone else to follow. No one did. She looked back, her smile appearing on cue, just the right tone, just the right timing, yet faintly unnecessary. "Yes, can I help you?" The question came out as light as breath, but lingered longer than it should have. Julian tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanged. He didn't answer right away. It was a silence that unnerved people, not because it lacked confidence, but because it invited others to speak first, to reveal what they assumed he wouldn't notice. He opened his phone a smooth, practiced motion and pulled up his reservation confirmation. "I'm not looking for anyone. I'm here to check in." Ashlyn blinked once, then gave a polite nod, though her gaze stayed cautious. Her voice dropped slightly soft, but not sincere. "Let me check that for you." She leaned toward the monitor, fingers gliding across the keyboard like a dance. Julian didn't watch her. He looked toward the wall behind her, where an antique Swiss clock hung beside a painting of a mountain landscape. The hands pointed to 9:12 a.m. Ashlyn said nothing for over a minute. Just the sound of keystrokes and paper flipping at a nearby desk. Then, finally, she exhaled as if she'd just confirmed something hard to believe. "I don't see your name on the reservation list for the presidential suite, sir." Julian nodded slowly. "I have an email confirmation, if you need it." Ashlyn smiled, brief, closed-lipped. "Yes, I'm very sorry, but is it possible you booked a different Valmont property? We have 3 locations in Chicago." Julian didn't flinch. He tilted his phone toward her, clearly indicating. "Here, Valmont, North Michigan Avenue, from the 4th to the 7th, presidential suite, booked 2 months ago." Ashlyn leaned in. She glanced quickly at the phone screen, its light reflecting in her pupils. Then she looked up again, still with the professional smile, but her eyes now subtly avoiding his. "I see it, but in our system, the suite's already been checked in. There may have been an error, or—" Julian didn't reply. He simply looked at her. A look long enough that people accustomed to judging others by appearance begin to feel the weight of being observed themselves. Ashlyn adjusted her name tag, then continued. "Also, for specialty suites like this, we typically require prior verification of credit and corporate credentials. It's possible the information used to make your booking hasn't been fully authenticated." There was no accusation in her voice, but there was doubt. And Julian knew the doubt didn't come from the system. It came from the look, from the skin, from the idea that luxury must come wrapped in a familiar visual, the kind they're used to seeing. Ashlyn lowered her head, scrolling again, not to verify, but to perform the motion of checking. She was following the unspoken script to deny without directly refusing. "I understand you have confirmation, but without proper card verification, I'm afraid we can't assign the presidential suite. Perhaps you'd like to try the downtown Valmont. They have premium accommodations. More suitable." More suitable. Julian heard it. Clearly. She'd said more suitable. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't book downtown. I booked here. And I paid. In full." Ashlyn clasped her hands gently at her waist, still smiling. "I'm very sorry, but we truly can't release the suite without verification of identity and financial credentials, even with a booking code." Julian didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't act offended. Only silence, the kind that hangs long enough to shift something in the air for anyone paying attention. Ashlyn lowered her gaze, adjusting her sleeve. Across the lobby, a team of security officers was changing shifts. One of them glanced toward the front desk just long enough to notice that a black man had been standing there too long. Julian remained straight-backed, still. No one in the hotel realized at that moment. It wasn't his silence that was unusual. It was what his silence meant. Behind the internal door, the sound of footsteps echoed. Someone was coming. Footsteps echoed behind the frosted glass door behind the front desk. A white man stepped out, his walk steady, unhurried. A navy 3-piece suit clung precisely to his frame. His shirt collar, stiff as office paper. On the left breast pocket, a small matte gold nameplate, Caleb Hartsfield, front desk manager. The way he approached, not rushed, not warm, carried the energy of someone used to managing sensitive situations. "Good morning, sir. I'm Caleb, the front desk manager. Ashlyn mentioned there was some trouble verifying your reservation." Julian turned. His eyes met Caleb's, not with suspicion, nor with caution, just a calm presence. Still, like a lake without ripples. "There's no trouble. I have a confirmed reservation for the presidential suite. Email from the Valmont system. Fully paid." Caleb gave a polite smile, the kind people wear when what you've said isn't wrong, but still needs clarification. "I understand, but our presidential suite is a highly exclusive category, typically reserved for long-term corporate partners or guests whose credit credentials and purpose of stay have been pre-approved." Julian said nothing. He reopened the email and extended the phone. Caleb glanced just for a split second, then didn't take the phone. Just a slight shake of the head, as if he'd seen enough. "I'm afraid this confirmation may be the result of a booking system oversight, And currently, as it's peak check-in time, we can't proceed with room allocation until full verification is complete. Peak time. Julian glanced around the lobby. 3 guests seated. A family checking out, rolling suitcases. Not crowded, not chaotic. He looked directly at Caleb. What else besides peak time? Caleb eased his shoulders back. His tone softened, trying to sound conciliatory. I completely understand the inconvenience, and I truly apologize. But to uphold our standards, we must follow protocol. That suite can't be released without completion of the 3-step verification. Julian's hand remained extended, the reservation email still glowing on his phone screen. Name, confirmation number, booking dates, payment verification. Everything is here. Caleb gave a faint smile this time, tinged with rehearsed discomfort. I know. But our standards don't rely on individual confirmations alone. For the presidential tier, we require corporate documentation, purpose of visit, letters of reference from affiliated partners or institutions, or someone who looks like the kind of person you expect to see standing here. Julian didn't raise his voice, didn't change his tone. The words hung like a rhetorical question, but no one dared answer. Caleb blinked, his face relaxed, but his eyes narrowed. Please understand, this isn't personal. It's operational policy. If we make exceptions for one, we must for all. And that compromises the brand. Julian nodded. He closed the phone, slid it back into his coat pocket. The brand, or a finely tuned algorithm of prejudice. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He took a half step back, glancing discreetly at Ashlyn, who stood a few feet away, eyes still fixed on her screen in forced focus. Julian spoke again, slower this time. I don't need an exception. I need the respect due to someone who did everything by the book, on time, and within your system. Caleb adjusted his cuff. His smile returned thinner now. You're absolutely entitled to feel that way. And I have a responsibility to uphold the standards of this property. There it was again, standards. Standards that seemed flexible depending on who was standing in front of them. Standards unwritten in the operations manual, but etched clearly in the eyes of the gatekeepers. The lobby fell into a strange hush. No one raised their voice, but the silence became too pronounced. Julian remained, hands in his coat pockets. His eyes on Caleb, not accusing, not accepting. Caleb exhaled softly, his tone lowered, trying to create comfort. Perhaps I can propose a compromise. We can assist you with a comparable suite at our downtown branch. Their verification systems are more flexible. Here, unfortunately. I booked here, not downtown. I understand, but at this point, the situation is beyond my authority to resolve. If you'd like, I can print a transfer confirmation. Your payment will be refunded within 3 to 5 business days. Julian looked at him. No words, just silence. And in that silence, even the most carefully worded policy became meaningless. A soft chime rang from the far left elevator. A white couple stepped out from the executive suite floor. They passed Julian with a casual glance, then exited toward the front door, secure in one simple truth: they would never be asked. What brings you here? Julian spoke, slowly. I'm not here to negotiate. Caleb said nothing. Julian continued, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. I'm not in uniform. I didn't bring a lawyer. I'm not asking for priority. I'm asking to be treated in accordance with the booking I made. Caleb offered a tight, awkward smile. I sincerely apologize if you feel unwelcome, but... Julian cut in. Don't apologize. When someone masters the art of refusing with courtesy, an apology becomes nothing more than decorative sound. A heavy pause. Caleb blinked, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. Julian leaned slightly forward, not in threat, but to close the moment. I'll stay here a few more minutes. Give you all time to reconsider the standards you're upholding. He didn't walk away, didn't raise his phone. He stood there among expensive perfumes and glittering chandeliers like a warning that still hadn't been understood. There was no meeting, No consultation, no appearance from a senior executive. Only Caleb remained, standing still, his tone unwavering. If you're unable to provide further verification, I'm afraid we won't be able to assist you further here. Julian didn't blink. So you're officially refusing? Caleb paused as if considering whether this was truly a refusal or just a failure to meet conditions. Then he nodded, slowly. I believe we've followed protocol appropriately, and I don't have the authority to process your request beyond this point. Julian stood tall, his hand resting gently on the black marble edge of the front desk. A brief silence passed just long enough for Ashlyn to pretend to adjust something on her screen. Across the lobby, 2 security guards had left their posts. They weren't rushing, just walking forward, as if summoned by silence. Caleb raised a hand lightly, in a gesture meant to seem polite. Sir, I'll have to ask you to leave the lobby, not because you've done anything wrong, but to avoid any inconvenience for our other guests. It is peak time, after all. Julian turned his gaze toward him. His face wasn't defiant, but it wasn't submissive either. You don't need to remind me it's peak time. I booked this room for this exact hour, long before Ashlyn even began her morning shift. Caleb lowered his hand. We're very sorry, but the decision has been made. One of the guards now stood 2 steps away, expressionless, gaze deliberately averted. The entire lobby froze. An injustice was unfolding gracefully, politely, yet in full daylight. Julian turned slowly. No goodbyes. Only the quiet sound of his footsteps across polished stone, each step measuring the patience of a man who had stood before far more powerful rooms than this. As he approached the revolving door barely 10 feet away, a voice rang out. Not loud, but not soft enough to be ignored. Looks more like a delivery guy than someone booking the presidential suite. It came with a shrill giggle from a white woman walking beside her husband. They both wore luxury athleisure, Italian down jackets, goose feather hoods draped casually over their wrists. They passed him like he was an antique fixture, something that existed in the room, but didn't deserve acknowledgement. Julian didn't turn around. But every word of that comment landed on his back like warm tar, not hot enough to burn, but sticky enough to leave a mark. It wasn't the first time, but it was another cut. The revolving door turned slowly. Cold winter air swept in as if to compensate for the stifling air inside. Julian stepped out. His eyes blinked softly, as though crossing an unwanted threshold. A bellhop stationed outside noticed. He said nothing. But the small bow he offered, whether from recognition or discomfort, left Julian with a moment of stillness to carry with him. The guard didn't follow him out. The glass door spun back into place, a transparent wall dividing 2 worlds visible to each other, yet untouchable. Julian stood on the granite steps, facing the damp street. Black cars passed by, mirroring the bright lights of the luxury boutique across the avenue. Then a black Genesis sedan pulled up. Its hazard lights blinked once. The driver stepped out, dark brown skin, long coat, wool hat. A familiar face bent down to open the rear passenger door. Everything all right, sir? The driver asked, his voice even, but eyes betraying concern. Julian didn't answer immediately. He settled into the back seat, removed his gloves, placed them neatly on his lap. His eyes lingered on the screen of his phone for a few seconds, not deciding what to do, but how far to go. Omar. Yes, sir. Call legal. Set a meeting at Valmont in 45 minutes, and contact Chloe. Have her bring the equity acquisition contract original copy, both the notarized and the redlined version. Omar nodded. Understood. I'll alert the legal team and assistant Chloe now. Julian looked out the window. The hotel lobby was still visible, blurred through frosted glass. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. There was only quiet. The kind of quiet one develops after years of being shaped by judgments, then unlearning those shapes, layer by layer. And Omar. Yes. Julian turned his wrist, opened a PDF file. The transaction ID of the acquisition lit up on screen. He looked forward, voice firm. Don't park too far. I'll be back, not to check in, to take over. 10:17 a.m. The revolving door of Valmont spun again. This time, it wasn't just one black man walking in. This time, he was accompanied by 3 others, a woman in a slate gray suit, hair neatly pinned, holding a tablet, an Asian man in a fitted shearling coat and rimless glasses, and a slim brown-skinned woman with no makeup, just eyes sharp as a scalpel. No one spoke loudly. No one moved hastily. They entered not like guests, but like this was their satellite office, not a hotel that had just rejected them exactly 47 minutes earlier. Julian led the way. He didn't look around, didn't glance at Ashlyn, the front desk agent struggling to keep her expression neutral, nor at Caleb, the manager, who now stood behind the counter, his eyes flickering with unease, barely hidden behind a crisply ironed collar. Julian stopped exactly where he had stood that morning. No smile, no anger, just a charcoal leather briefcase placed gently on the black marble counter without a sound. He opened it, pulled out a hardbound folder, sealed with notarized papers and embossed documentation. He said nothing at first, just made sure Caleb and Ashlyn could see the faintly printed logo. Blake Ascension Holdings. Then, he lifted his eyes, locked onto Caleb's. I'm not here to check in. I'm here so everyone in this building can check themselves. No one responded. The quiet click of high heels echoed once. The woman in the gray suit stepped forward, her name Chloe Ramirez, Chief Communications Officer to Julian Blake. This is the equity transfer contract, effective date 15 months ago. Blake Ascension is now the controlling shareholder of the Valmont chain. Mr. Blake is chairman of the executive board. Caleb's mouth opened but no sound came out. Ashlyn froze. She glanced at Caleb, then at Julian, then back to her computer screen as if the answers she needed could be summoned by the right keyword. But no keyword applied to this moment. Julian didn't move, didn't change his expression. Chloe handed over another paper, embossed and signed. This is the certified confirmation of Mr. Blake's operational authority, ratified by the board and processed through international legal channels. The Asian man finally spoke. Ethan Zhou, in-house counsel. Terms are clear. Mr. Blake has oversight authority, may evaluate staff conduct, and issue disciplinary action where necessary. Caleb swallowed. I wasn't notified of this change in ownership. Chloe responded gently. No anger. No theatrics. That's not your fault. But you are responsible for the conduct you've displayed, and the decisions made this morning have been fully documented. Ethan followed up. We've already requested footage from the internal security system and transcripts of desk communications. Everything is being archived under legal directive. The third woman stepped forward, Marisol Jimenez, Senior Director of HR. She swiped across her tablet quickly. Each individual involved will be interviewed today, following policy on conduct, bias, and professional responsibility. The process will be transparent, but the consequences will be concrete. Julian's eyes never left Caleb. I had a room reservation, but I won't be staying. I refuse to be a guest in a place where I must prove I belong. I'm here to change that. At the root. Caleb tried to hold his stance, but his collar wrinkled slightly, as if he himself were shrinking. Mr. Blake, I apologize if this morning we... Julian raised a hand slightly. Not angry, just deliberate. Don't apologize to me. I'm not the only one you wronged. Chloe glanced at her watch. The tech team is uploading the security data. HR has issued suspension notices to relevant staff. We're not doing this for spectacle. We're doing it to restore culture. Marisol stepped closer. At noon, we'll hold an emergency staff meeting. Mr. Blake may choose to speak. If not, I'll read the letter he prepared. Julian stood still, calm, composed, and as sharp as a blade that never needs to be drawn to be feared. I won't say much, I won't need to, because everything that needed to be said, Valmont said it this morning. Caleb looked at him like a man who just slipped off the edge of a frozen lake. Julian turned to Chloe, his voice low but unwavering. We've begun, haven't we? Yes, sir. The system is in motion. Julian stepped away from the desk, not to leave the hotel but to walk deeper into its core. into the operations center, where true power isn't declared through volume but signed into policy and etched into standard. The internal surveillance room was buried deep within Valmont Hotel's technical floor. No paintings, no flowers, just the scent of new plastic, LED monitors, and the silence of truths buried beneath protocol. 7 screens sat side by side, each replaying a different angle of that morning's front lobby. Ethan Joe, the in-house counsel, operated the playback system. He didn't say much, just pulled up the footage and scrolled back to 9:02 a.m., the moment Julian stepped through the revolving door. The sound of leather soles touching polished stone echoed from the monitor speakers, not loud, but unusually resonant in the closed-off space. Julian sat still, hand resting on the table, eyes locked on the screen. Ashlyn appeared first, typing, glancing, asking, "Who are you looking for?" Then Caleb emerged, a nod, a smile, then a polite dismissal. No shouting, no slurs. Only averted gazes, polite head shakes, words dipped in neutrality, but anyone who's been rejected based on their skin knows exactly what they mean. They didn't attack you, they just excluded you. Chloe tapped notes into her tablet. Marisol glanced at a smaller screen live transcription of radio chatter between lobby staff. He's been standing there too long. Doesn't really look like a presidential suite guest, does he? Julian exhaled, not out of surprise, but recognition. Discrimination doesn't need bullets, only silent consent. A soft knock on the door. A young black man entered, tall, slender, dressed in a bellboy's uniform black coat, red cuff trim, one white glove. He removed his hat, stepped forward with measured pace. "I'm Micah, Mr. Blake." Julian looked up. His gaze softened not from familiarity, but from recognizing something unspoken. Micah stood tall, but his voice was low. I wanted to say something. Not officially. Just something. This morning, when you were denied, I was there. I was at the service elevator, watching. Julian gave a slight nod. Micah swallowed hard. I recognized you. They once sent out an internal bulletin about new strategic shareholders. I saw your face. I knew who you were. But I didn't say anything. I heard them refuse you. I saw you being walked out. And I just stood there, like one of those marble pillars in the lobby. No one interrupted. No one comforted him. Micah continued. I was afraid. I'm on probation. Only 5 weeks in. They said interfering at the front desk could lead to formal warnings. So I stayed silent. But I know now. I stayed silent at the wrong moment. Julian didn't reply immediately. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them, his voice calm, even, without judgment. Silence is a form of choice, and every choice has consequences. Micah lowered his head. He said nothing more. Julian did not console him, but he didn't condemn him either. He stood, looked at the young man as if staring into a mirror from a lifetime ago, a younger black man, standing outside a boardroom, hearing wrong, not knowing what to do with it. You're not the first to stay silent, Julian said slowly. Just don't be the last to stay silent when it counts. Micah nodded. I don't want to be, not anymore. Marisol stepped in, her tone gentle, but resolute. Thank you. Micah, what you've just done will be noted. You won't be judged by what you didn't do, but by what you're doing now. He looked at her, then at Julian. I don't want praise. I just want that. Next time, if something like this happens, I'll be the first to say, wait, something's not right. Julian smiled for the first time that morning. That's enough. Chloe logged the exchange. Ethan gave a small nod. It was a small act, but big changes often begin in moments no one thought mattered. Micah left the room. Julian watched him go. A silent man had finally spoken. Now came the moment for those who often spoke too much to be held accountable for what they chose not to hear. 11:42 a.m. The lobby at Valmont was filling up. Midday guests rolled their suitcases across the polished floor, the wheels hissing in waves. The ceiling lights were just as beautiful as any other day, but no one was admiring the beauty now. All eyes were fixed on one spot, the front desk. Caleb stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, the collar of his dress shirt beginning to crease along the fold. Ashlyn stood beside him, not looking at the monitor, fingers nervously clasping each other. In front of them stood Chloe, Marisol, and Ethan. Beside them Julian, still in his trench coat, hands tucked calmly into his pockets. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Marisol opened her tablet. After reviewing the full dataset, camera footage, front desk protocol logs, and internal communications, we conclude that the conduct of the following individuals constitutes a severe breach of non-discriminatory service standards, behavioral bias policy, and operational responsibility. The air thickened. A nearby guest stopped scrolling his phone. An older man whispered, "Is that the manager?" Marisol continued. Caleb Hartsfield, Ashlyn Barrett. Effective immediately. Your employment with Valmont is terminated. You will be guided through the offboarding and final settlement process. Security staff will assist you in collecting your personal belongings within the next 30 minutes. Caleb's mouth opened. Ashlyn hissed under her breath. This can't be happening. I was just following protocol. Julian turned his head, looking directly at her for the first time up close. If the protocol teaches you to deny someone a room because they don't look like a luxury guest, then the protocol should be dismantled. And if you chose to act that way without anyone forcing you, then this isn't a punishment. It's a reflection. 2 security staff approached. No one was dragged out. No shouting. Caleb placed his name tag on the desk, his hand trembling. He walked away slowly, never once looking back. Ashlyn followed, head bowed. The pink in her cheeks now faded. A middle-aged woman near the desk spoke up. I was denied a room here last year. Not quite like this. But I recognized that look. Today, I saw justice, dressed in silence. Julian gave her a gentle nod. The footsteps of Caleb and Ashlyn faded toward the back hallway. The door closed behind them, quiet, yet echoing for far too long. Ethan handed a folder to Chloe. Time for restructuring. Marisol turned to Julian. Have you reviewed the candidate shortlist? Julian nodded. I only need one name. Not the best on paper, but the one who chose what's right. When playing it safe was easier. He looked left, toward the corner of the lobby. There stood Micah, the young bellboy, still holding his cap. Julian called out, Micah. The young man stepped forward, cautious, eyes tense. I've read the report, and I heard what you said this morning. Micah swallowed hard. Julian continued, I don't need perfection. I need someone brave enough to make things right while there's still time to do so. Are you ready? Micah nodded. Yes, sir, I'm ready to learn and to be held accountable. Julian held out his hand. Then starting today, Operations Coordination Assistant, reporting directly to Marisol, and under my observation, Micah stood frozen. He stared at Julian's hand, a hand that had been denied just hours earlier by a passing glance now offering him a turning point. He gripped it firmly. I won't let you down. Julian didn't smile, but his nod carried a quiet weight that Micah had never felt from anyone else in this place. Chloe turned to Marisol. Initiate the restructuring pathway. Audit every step of the guest intake experience from staff training to the unspoken codes at the front desk. I want everything rewritten this time with a human lens, not a segmentation lens. Marisol noted it down, nodding. And we'll launch the first edition of the Hospitality Without Assumptions program. No PowerPoint slides. We'll begin with what happened this morning. Julian turned toward the escalator. He didn't say another word. Guests continued their check-ins, but something in the air had shifted. No one laughed idly. No one stared at others too long without glimpsing themselves in return. Valmont, within mere hours, had shifted from pride to self-examination. And sometimes, that's the first step of every revolution. 1 week later, Valmont was no longer the place where Julian Blake had been asked, Who are you here to see? It was no longer a place that needed terminations to prove it had standards. The Monday morning air carried a different kind of quiet now, not because people were afraid, but because they were finally listening. At the front desk, the nameplates had changed: Amira Chen, Ronald J. Toussaint, Fatima Karim. 3 names, 3 skin tones, 3 different beginnings. But they all shared one thing: a gaze that was steady, equal, and long enough not to overlook anyone. Micah, now dressed in a simple suit, wore a badge that read Assistant Operations Supervisor. He stood beside a new hire, teaching how to handle situations not found in the handbook with one opening question. Can you sense what the person in front of you might be worried about? Over by the coffee bar, Chloe was speaking with the internal training team. Sessions no longer began with Valmont takes pride in diversity, but with questions like, when was the last time you stayed silent in the face of injustice, and why did you choose silence? The piano still sat in the corner of the lobby, but this morning, a middle-aged brown-skinned man played a gentle jazz tune. He wasn't hired talent. He was a returning guest once escorted out by security for not dressing appropriately. Today, he was an honored guest. The brass plaques on the front desk had been replaced with one laser-etched line. Respect is not earned here, it is assumed until broken. Valmont hadn't changed its chandeliers. It hadn't changed its carpets. It had simply changed the way people looked through each other. 9:05 a.m. The revolving doors turned. A man walked in. Dark brown trench coat, leather shoes, unshined, a turtleneck sweater, slight weight on the shoulders, no phone in hand, no luggage. No one looked up in suspicion. No one looked down in judgment. A new staff member, Javier, walked up with a genuine smile. Good morning, sir. Are you here to check in, or would you like some assistance? Julian looked at the young man, his gaze surprised not by the politeness, but by the absence of a glance that scanned him top to bottom. I'm just passing through. Javier nodded. If you'd like to sit for a bit, the lounge to your left is open. There's live music every Monday. Julian smiled faintly. Live music. Yes, started this week. Part of our new program, Welcome Without Asking. Julian walked slowly toward the lounge. No one followed. No one asked his name. No one asked for ID. From afar, Micah saw him. He didn't rush over. He simply nodded the way one nods at someone who once stood in a storm and now returns in peace. Julian sat near the window. A cup of coffee was placed before him, no order needed. A server remembered his habit. Light cream, no sugar. He looked around, then up at the chandelier above. Still shining, but no longer the centerpiece. A white woman walked in behind Julian. Red curls, loose earbuds, an olive leather suitcase. She approached the front desk. Fatima greeted her English gentle, tinged with a Middle Eastern lilt. No scrutinizing stare, no hesitation. I'm glad you arrived early. We've already prepared your preferred juice, as noted in your profile. The woman blinked, surprised. I've never stayed here before. That's all right, but we prefer to begin with kindness. Julian heard it, and he tilted his head just slightly. What he heard wasn't a model front desk script. It was the sound of a system, healing itself. A guest nearby spotted Julian. They seemed to recognize him, but weren't quite sure. Who is he again, they whispered. He looks familiar. Javier, standing nearby, smiled. Just someone who showed up at the right time. Julian took a sip of his coffee, smiled. He didn't need to be recognized. Because real power doesn't arrive with applause. It begins when people no longer need you to do what's right. The 21st floor conference room at Valmont looked no different from the week before. A 12-seat walnut table, white leather chairs, crystal lighting overhead. But today, no one sat with their back against the chair. Julian Blake stood at the head of the table. No presentation screen behind him. No handouts. Just him and the eyes of people waiting for something greater than an administrative decision. Across from him sat shareholder reps, regional directors, heads of operations, and senior leadership. They had been taught that Valmont was the temple of standards. Today, They came to hear that very word. Redefined. Julian didn't start with a speech. He asked, "How many of you have ever been asked to prove you deserve to be in a room?" No one raised their hand, but no one dared to laugh. He continued, voice steady. "This past week, I walked around the hotel lobby like a nameless guest. No one asked who I was. No one checked my badge. But everyone greeted me like I belonged. And that was the moment I knew. We were starting to move in the right direction." Marisol nodded. Chloe quietly took notes. Julian turned toward the large window, looking out over Lake Michigan. Fairness doesn't start with a policy. It starts with the smallest behaviors we refuse to let slide. A passing glance, a word unspoken, a gesture withheld. He turned back. "I don't want Valmont to be famous for what happened. I want it to be an example that mistakes are not endpoints if we choose to act and correct them." No one moved, but everyone listened. Julian placed his hand on the table. Slowly. "Legacy is not marble, not chandeliers, not imported Turkish rugs." He paused. His eyes weren't sharp, but they were clear. "Legacy is when a new front desk agent never again asks, 'Who are you here to see?' When a black man in a worn trench coat walks in and is invited to sit, not asked, 'Do you have an appointment?'" Chloe spoke softly. "When staff stop being part of the system and start becoming people who help shape it." Julian nodded. "I don't believe in diversity if it's just a number in a report. I believe in change that begins with the person pouring coffee for guests in the morning. If that person understands they're part of the experience, not just filling a shift." A board member asked, "Do we plan to share this roadmap publicly?" "The media's waiting. They want to know Valmont's direction after the incident." Julian shook his head quietly. "The media will always be hungry, but not everything is a meal. Some things should be felt before they're published." Ethan, the in-house attorney, murmured, "So, no press conference." Julian gave a faint smirk, not quite a smile. "We don't need a statement. This hotel is the statement." After the meeting, Julian didn't return to the presidential suite. He went down to the lobby, paused at the front desk where a small plaque now read, "Welcome, you belong here." Micah was guiding a new employee. He wore a simple suit, no tie. His gestures were precise, his words few but his gaze encouraging. There was nothing in his posture that said probation. He belonged not because he was kept, but because he had stood up at the right time. Julian sat in the far corner of the lobby. No one noticed him. No need. He looked at the piano, at the server, at an Asian couple greeted in their native language, at two little boys, one black, one white, running across the red carpet. No one stopped them. This was a place where power didn't need to prove itself, where no one had to say, "We're not discriminatory," because those who had been discriminated against had finally been left alone. An assistant from the executive office rushed over. "Mr. Julian, CNN is requesting a private interview. CNBC is calling too. They want your official comments on the new initiative." Julian didn't look up. No need. The fewer the words, the harder they are to misinterpret. "Should we leave behind any statements, sir?" He folded the newspaper, stood, replied without turning. "Let the guests decide. If they feel lighter when they leave, then we've done it right." He stepped toward the revolving doors. Midday light spilled across his shoulder, casting his shadow long across the carpet. No one knew who he was, but everything he just did would remain. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.